in the 4th and 5th century in the early church was the squabble and fighting over the development or wording of our faith. Christ didn't tell us how to explain Trinity. He didn't tell us how to explain his relationship with the Father and the Spirit. None of that. He didn't tell us how he was God and man. And it was the faith of the church that started to grow and develop that needed to define these things. And that's why we have today our creed, the Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed, which was 2 ecumenical councils that created it. And I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, etc. You know that very well. And it was at that time that the empire was still very strong. Constantine moved from Rome, which had got decadent, and he didn't like it. So he went to a place on the Bosphorus, which is today at the junction between Europe and Asia. It's present-day Istanbul. And he founded a city. At that time, it was probably a little village called Byzance or Byzantis, so they don't know the exact name, Byzantium. And he founded a city there, and of course, he liked himself, so he named it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. And it rivaled any other city in the whole empire. It was beautiful. So the head of the Roman Empire had been moved. It was still the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was very unique, because everything was connected in the early days by road systems. We can't comprehend that today. In the United States we can, how we have our freeway system. A couple of weeks ago I drove across from Detroit to California. I had no trouble getting there with the interstate system, never needing a map. You know, you just follow the arrows or follow the numbers and you get there. But in those early days they had roads that all roads connected to Rome somehow or other. And to this day, in Syria and in Lebanon, in the old areas, you'll still find remnants of the old Roman roads. There's a very beautiful one on the way to Antioch from Aleppo, Syria. The sad part is, when the empire started losing control and stuff, and more people were moving into these areas and building it, they began to take the stones from the roads and build their homes. So many of the roads are gone. Many of the roads are gone. But they were all connected. Up until the 5th century, this area from the great Line Massive in Syria, today they call them the Dead Cities. It's a very vacant area. It doesn't look like anything could live there. And it stretches a very large triangular area, miles and miles and miles and miles, hundreds of miles. And if you drive through there, you'll see the remnants of the old Christian churches, and you'll see the remnants of hotels. How did they live? It was irrigated in those days because the Romans knew how to do that. And the Greeks and Romans knew how to do that. The language was still Greek, of course, even in the Roman Empire. Latin became spoken after a while. So they had life going on there. They grew olives, and they sold their olives, and they lived. Of course, when Islam came, that whole area was depleted of Christianity. And the place today is called the Dead Cities of the Line Massive, where the mountains are they have lots of lime in it. Totally gone as a Christian area. So it wasn't just in modern days that we're seeing difficulties with Christianity in the Middle East. It went back to those days, particularly when Islam came up in the 600s and began to propagate their own religion, the religion of Muhammad, through the Quran, and more people joined. Interesting that one city I mentioned to you where St. Thecla's monastery is, and our old 4th century monastery on top, they speak the Aramaic language there to this day. Arabic is the language of the country, but the people still speak the Aramaic language, the closest dialect to what Jesus spoke. When Jesus was alive, being a good Jewish man, living with other Jewish people, they did not speak Hebrew. At that time, Hebrew was a classical language that was not spoken in that time. They spoke Aramaic, Syriac, a dialect of it, and it's the same root today as several languages, Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, and that's what he spoke. So they still speak that there. And they were beginning to lose it. They prayed in that language. But interestingly, not far from that village are two other villages. That's all Christian, that village. Nearby, within 5-10 minutes, there's other little villages in the mountains there. That mountain is called the Kalamun Mountain, and it was all Christian at one time. There's two villages that are 100% Muslims. What language do they speak? Aramaic. Spoken. They don't speak Arabic, or they have to speak Arabic for school and things like that, but they spoke Aramaic, meaning they were 100% Christian at one time. And never lost their spoken language all those years. Hundreds and hundreds. When did they become Islamic? We don't know, but it's way back then. So, there was always somebody coming in and conquering these poor people out there. And Christianity began to dwindle. We know Northern Africa at the time of St. Augustine and all, was phenomenally Christian. Hundreds and thousands of churches, and people too. When we go see a dead city today out in the Middle East or in Northern Africa, and you hear that at one time there was 300,000, 400,000 people living there, you can't believe it. But it was true. It was true. Antioch, which today was the largest city of the Syrian province of the Roman Empire, had well over 500,000 people living at one time. Today, about 100,000 people, and 99% Islamic. And it's very difficult even to see the remnants there of Christianity anymore. In Turkey, after World War I and the Ottomans were conquered, and then eventually Kemal Atatürk took over and made it a secular government, you still see remnants of Christianity. Not too much, but you still find it. That whole place where some of the apostles went and St. Paul went. The apostles, the 12 disciples of Christ, went out to preach. Peter, and eventually Paul, first went to Antioch. And then Peter moved on after a couple of years and went to Rome. So if we consider Peter the prime apostle, and the 12 apostles we generally recognize today as the first bishops of the church, Peter was the first bishop of Antioch. Our former patriarch, who died in 2000, always told the story when he was visiting the U.S. and he had to go to, they asked him to be at the Senate and House of Representatives, I think it was the Senate, and Dirksen was there, and they were having breakfast, and he said to him, what's a patriarch? It was almost the end of the dinner time, of the breakfast time. And he said to him, are you Catholic? Oh yeah, I'm Catholic. I'm a good Irish Catholic, whatever. He said, you know who St. Peter was? He said, yes. St. Peter was the first pope. He said, well, St. Peter was the first bishop in Antioch, where my roots come from. He said, and if he had died there, I would be number one instead of number two today. Probably that might have happened. Rome became the seat because it was the head of the empire at that time. That's basically why. And Peter and Paul were there. Other